There's bad science, and then there's really bad science, and then there's fraudulent science. Wow, today we're going to talk about some really bad science that went through the peer review process. To all those people out there who say, oh, has that been peer reviewed? As if this was somehow an anointing process that elevated data up into the heavens where it can't be questioned or touched again. This is a really instructive story. This is really bad. This is $250 million, many years wasted, all because of some very egregious fraud. Let's look at it now. This strikes Alzheimer's research. This is serious, folks. And by the way, this reflects back on all the other things that have just happened to us in terms of evidence being suppressed, evidence being diminished, other evidence being elevated. We're going to go through all of it, but it speaks to this one problem. We have a giant crisis in our science and medical system at this point in time, as if you didn't already know that, but now it's being really laid bare. We've got to fix this. It needs fixing. It has to be fixed. Otherwise, nothing ever gets better. All right, what is this bombshell? So this is reported here in science.org. Great article here by Charles Pillar. This is really actually phenomenal. And it's a sad, sad tale. So blots on a field. Great title. I'll tell you why, what that means. A neuroscience image sleuth finds signs of fabrication in scores of Alzheimer's articles threatening a reigning theory of the disease. Terrible disease. Last thing we needed was some really bad, fraudulent science taking us off in a wrong direction where time and effort is wasted when it could have been spent productively. Quote, but Schrag's sleuthing drew him into a different episode of possible misconduct, leading to findings that threaten one of the most cited Alzheimer's studies of this century and numerous related experiments. The first author of that influential study, published in Nature in 2006, was an ascending neuroscientist, Sylvain Lesnay, of the University of Minnesota, UMN, Twin Cities. His work underpins a key element of the dominant yet controversial amyloid hypothesis of Alzheimer's, talk about what that means in a second, which holds that alpha beta clumps known as plaques in brain tissue are a primary cause of the devastating illness, which afflicts tens of millions globally in what looked like a smoking gun for the theory and a lead to possible therapies. Lesnay and his colleagues discovered that an A-beta subtype seemed to prove it caused dementia in rats. If Schrag's doubts are correct, Lesnay's findings were an elaborate mirage. So this is the paper, 2006, March. A specific amyloid beta protein assembly in the brain impairs memory. We see on here a number of names. First author, Sylvain Lesnay, that would be the lead author position. The first author position, and then the lead down here by Karen Ash. Two names we're going to hear a little bit more about in a second. This is explosive. It shows that how even exceedingly well-regarded Nature is, like, that's allegedly the preeminent journal. It's like saying The Lancet or New England Journal of Medicine, words that actually meant a lot more a couple of years ago. I realize today those names are all kind of trashed, but for the same exact problem that we're about to talk through here. And this speaks to the idea that when people are trying to beat down other people saying, oh, you can't just do your own research. We have to trust doctors. We have to trust peer review. Well, we do if it works. Okay. If it doesn't work, then we have other problems on our hands. Here, it didn't work. So I can't wait to see what the response is. By the way, as of the 14th of July, an editor's note had been amended to this article by Nature reading, the editors of Nature have been alerted to concerns regarding some of the figures in this paper. Nature is investigating these concerns, and a further editorial response will follow as soon as possible. In the meantime, readers are advised to use caution when using results reported therein. End quote. Well, at least they've put a warning on there, but they haven't taken the step of pulling it down. I think they actually should have taken that step. Let's go through this. So from this same article in science.org, quote, in the brains of Ash's transgenic mice, the UMN team discovered a previously unknown oligomer species dubbed AB star amyloid beta star 56 after its relatively heavy molecular weight compared with other oligomers. So amyloid beta, it's just a protein. It weighs 56 kilodaltons. That's a measure of its weight. And transgenic mice means they took mice and they changed their genome so that the offspring would actually express something. This is what the humanized mice were that they were using in Wuhan in order to investigate coronaviruses. You take the mice and you can change them. So they did that, and they had them overproduce this amyloid beta star 56 protein. It's a protein. Quote, the group isolated AB star 56 and injected it into young rats. The rats' capacity to recall simple previously learned information, such as the location of a hidden platform in a maze, plummeted. The 2006 paper's first author, sometimes credited as the discoverer of AB star 56, was Lesnay, a young scientist Ash had hired straight out of a PhD program at the University of Caen, Normandy in France. Okay. Starting to get a sense of the cast of characters here. Now, just so we're all on the same path here, with Alzheimer's, when you look at the brains of deceased, obviously, Alzheimer's patients, look in there, you see these things called plaques. Then the plaques are just these places of really dense staining. And when you look down deeper in, there's all these amyloid beta proteins and other components. It's just composed of a big smush of proteins. And so the question is, are these correlated or causative? When people get Alzheimer's, do these things show up because it's correlated with it, or do these things show up and cause the Alzheimer's? That was the question. This paper in 2006 seemed to show that what was happening here was that the amyloid beta star 56 protein is the one that was causing this, because they injected that into the mice or the rat model. And so the rats then had what looked to be pretty consistent with Alzheimer's neurocognitive impairments. Great. That's how science works often. So before we continue on to that story, very quickly, you can always follow me here. This is where you find me. Take a screenshot. We put all of these down in the descriptions as well. We do advise people, if you want to be sure not to lose track of me, come on over to Peak Prosperity. You can come and become a member if you like. And the reasons are because sometimes we get censored, but also I heard just this week again from people who said that they are unsubscribed multiple times from this channel. It's part of the shadow banning that I face constantly. And so if you're experiencing that, remember to resubscribe, remember to hit the like button. Those all help us here. As well, our readers really do like to point out that they get a lot from this channel and a lot from the work that I promote. And as well, we've got a great community. So these people who are my subscribers, they're actually more than that. They're tribe members. We are part of the remnant. We are the people who just, well, we can deal with logic and we can deal with common sense, and we still have a sense of humor. So all those things, come on by, check out Peak Prosperity if you want. All right. So carrying on in purple down below, quote, Ash touted amyloid beta star 56 on our website as the first substance ever identified in brain tissue in Alzheimer's research that has been shown to cause memory impairment. The first substance ever identified that shows memory impairment. That's a big deal, right? That's a really big deal. An accompanying editorial in Nature called amyloid beta star 56, a star suspect in Alzheimer's. Al's Forum, a widely read online hub for the field, titled its coverage, Alpha Beta Star is Born, or Amyloid Beta Star is Born. Less than 2 weeks after the paper was published, Ash won the prestigious Potemkin Prize for Neuroscience, partly for work leading to amyloid beta star 56. Ooh, there's a lot of ego, there's money, there's prestige, there's a lot on the line. And so when people have a lot on the line, you know, the desire to cut corners, maybe make the study torture it a little until it tells the data that you want to tell. Sometimes you're just a true believer. You know that you're right. You know it. Then your studies just aren't quite conforming to what you know is right. So, you know, you tweak the data a little bit, make it look a little bit better. Sometimes it's just a big company with giant financial interests. All right, that's what happens. So heavy spending resulted from that 2006 paper. The Nature paper, it's been cited in about 2,300 scholarly articles. That's a lot of influence. More than all but 4 other Alzheimer's basic research reports published since 2006, according to the Web of Science database. And since then, annual NIH support for studies labeled amyloid, oligomer, and Alzheimer's has risen from nearly zero to $287 million in 2021. Lesnay and Ash helped spark that explosion, experts say. Well, I'll say that's how science works. These people come out, peer-reviewed study says, we have this substance, we put it into rats, and it creates Alzheimer's. That's it. We got to find a way to block that thing from doing what it's doing. And that's how science works. So this is actually what scientific fraud looks like. And here's how it happened. So this is a gel blot here. And so what happens is these are all different lanes and gel electrophoresis, and you put a sample in and you apply an electric current to it, and these things migrate down, and then they resolve into these discrete bands by weight. Okay, so what's the problem? Well, this looks like a blob here, right? Well, so what happened was Ash uploaded this particular Western blot to PubPeer after Schrag said the version published in Nature showed cut marks, suggesting improper tampering with bands. So these are the bands down here in question. So he noted cut marks. In response, Ash, this researcher, uploaded this version, and he said, even with this version, check this out. This is what it looks like. Normally you see these over here? Take a look at these on that far side right there. Those, you see how they're different? You look at from the top band to the bottom, you can just by eye, you can see slight differences. But in that red box there, if you look at these bands, even though this one looks a little darker on the bottom than on the top, you can see, look at this. They're actually kind of the same. They look the same. They never look exactly the same. So he ran some studies on those and just did a little image analysis and said, okay, if we calculate the similarity, those bands on there had a similarity plot that looked like this, which is almost dead identical. And this is what a normal plot should look like if you had two dissimilar bands like these two right here. They just don't look quite the same. You should get these butterfly patterns, butterfly wing or dragonfly wing patterns. At any rate, clear, unmistakable sign of fraud. But by the way, this is after earlier fraud and had been corrected with a new image uploaded. The problem is none of these images support the actual conclusions of the papers. They're fraudulent and they're made up. All right, so continuing on with this awesome article in science.org, we have a 6-month investigation by Science provided strong support for Schrag's suspicions. That's what we do. We reproduce things in science. Schrag said, hey, I found this stuff. Here's my data. My data kind of looks like this. And Science Mag said, well, maybe we should look at that too. And they did. So they did a 6-month study, and it also raised questions about Lesnay's research. A leading independent image analyst and several top Alzheimer's researchers, including George Perry of the University of Texas, San Antonio, John Forsyth of the University of California, San Francisco, reviewed most of Schrag's findings at Science's request. They concurred with his overall conclusions, which cast doubt on hundreds of images, including more than 70 in Lesnay's papers. Some look like shockingly blatant examples of image tampering, says Donna Wilcock, an Alzheimer's expert at the University of Kentucky. The authors appear to have composed figures by piecing together parts of photos from different experiments, says Elizabeth Bick, a molecular biologist, well-known forensic image consultant. The obtained experimental results might not have been the desired results, and that data might have been changed to better fit a hypothesis, end quote. Yeah, that's called fraud. It's just out and out fraud. And very bad fraud, because this impacts humans, research, other people's lives, and of course, all the loved ones of people who are suffering from Alzheimer's, and then the people who have Alzheimer's themselves. Everybody gets defrauded by this process. And that's why it's so egregious and why we should care. And we should care because this isn't an isolated example. This happens over and over and over again. By the way, University of Minnesota still proudly lists Sylvain Lesnay. That's who he is. And of course, he was hired in by this woman, Karen Ash. You can see here, look at the pedigree. BA from Harvard, and then University of California, and Harvard Medical School, on and on. So this is somebody who's been very, very focused on success for her whole career. And I don't have any explanation for uploading a second set of defrauding images, except either you've been defrauded yourself and you weren't smart enough to know that, or you're part of it. Very hard to tell who the actual bad person is in this. So fraud has consequences. We all know about the Theranos case, where Elizabeth Holmes defrauded billions and billions of dollars out of people, had amazing people on her board of directors. Henry Kissinger was on there, etc. And did that using bad science and fraudulent science. And so this had very real impacts financially there. And as well, based on that amyloid beta star 6 protein, a monoclonal antibody was targeted against that. And guess what? That really didn't work in clinical trials. It didn't work at all. And that became something called, that monoclonal antibody is now a drug, $56,000 a year. It's called Aduhelm. It's put out by Biogen. And I reported on this on June 11th, 2021, months before any of this stuff came out about the fraud that was underpinning all of this. And to me, it just struck me really the serious consequences. But this really stood out for me, where we saw that a third member of a panel of outside advisors to the US FDA resigned in protest over the agency's decision to approve Biogen's Alzheimer's disease treatment, despite the committee's recommendations against doing so. So this offended me on multiple levels. First, the studies under it were awful because it not only didn't work, but when they dialed up the dose to see if they could make it work at a higher dose, all that happened was they caused brain swelling and bleeding in patients. This is very serious, folks. And despite all of that, the FDA overrode their own expert panel and approved this drug. Why? Well, the only conclusion I can come to is that the FDA is not actually in the business of properly regulating or caring about food, drug, health, patients, any of that. They obviously serve a very different master and a very different set of needs. But it all begins with torturing the basic science is the first starting point. So this was bad. So I reported on that a while ago. Now we have a dot to connect back to this. Okay. So in Nature itself, in 2016, they talk about this reproducibility crisis we have in science right now. So we have this massive science crisis. Quote, 1,500 scientists lift the lid on reproducibility. More than 70% of researchers have tried and failed to reproduce another scientist's experiments. And more than half have failed to reproduce their own experiments. What? Full stop. 70% couldn't reproduce another scientist's experiments? That's a crisis, folks. And so when we hear, well, is that peer reviewed? Is it a randomized controlled trial? Is it, as if there's some gold standard of excellence that once you get past that, all the dirty stuff falls away. And that's actually not the case. We should always be vigilant. We should always understand that conflicts of interest matter. I'm going to repeat that. Conflicts of interest matter. And when people are conflicted, either through their own ego, through their own sense of funding, through their own sense of social standing, because they were traumatized as children and they don't know how to be wrong, whatever the story is, people have their interests, which they will guard very carefully. And sometimes those conflict with what we would call the truth or science. But the idea that we have some version of science that's pristine, peer-reviewed science, it should be pristine, but it's really not. So let's carry on. Love this John Ioannidis, who just continues to rock it. The more I look into his career, the more he's just made, I think, some of the most positive, beneficial additions to science. True scientist and a gentleman. Back in August of 2005, he made a big splash with this particular finding here, where it was a summary, quote, there's increasing concern that most current research published research findings are false. The probability that a research claim is true may depend on study power and bias, the number of other studies on the same question, and importantly, the ratio of true to no relationships among the relationships probed in each scientific field. In this framework, a research finding is less likely to be true when, skip a few things, there is greater financial and other interest in prejudice. So that's a key finding. I mean, obviously, if there's financial interest, this is what happens. So pay no attention. Recently, we heard about how SARS-CoV-2 must have come from a wet market in Wuhan. And one of the key authors on that paper is a person named Christian Andersen, who just received an $8.9 million grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, yada, yada, right? There's heavy conflicts of interest here that always have to be understood. Always have to be understood. All right. In green, moreover, for many current scientific fields, claimed research findings may often be simply accurate measures of the prevailing bias. Oh, you saw the first segment I produced on this on masks. You saw some people who clearly had a strong bias. They wanted to show that masks worked. They cherry picked like crazy and couldn't even find enough representative, awesome studies that they had to take one and then mischaracterize its findings like they did with that whole idea of the tracheotomies and the plane fried and 20. It was, if you haven't seen that episode, take a look. But huge errors in that one. So again, moreover, for many current scientific fields, claimed research findings may often be simply accurate measures of the prevailing bias. All right. What we're going to do is go now to my website, and we're going to be talking about the power of self-delusion, the wisdom of the few, because this problem I've just articulated is now all over the news. So we got to track it. Very serious things are going on, and it's all rooted in people in power who hold the wrong view. Their biases, their conflicts of interest, militate against them, coming to rational conclusions for the benefit of the many. Instead, we find very self-interested conclusions for the benefit of the few. It's going to have huge impacts on your future. Come on by Peak Prosperity to check it out, and we'll talk about it more there. See you there.